thanks to all the hardworking drivers across the U.S. from the Allen Len Company.
The process for issuing these licenses is absolutely 100% broken. It has become a threat to public safety, and it is a national emergency that requires action right now.
Welcome to Trucking with OOIDA. I'm Ashley Blackford.
And I'm Scott Thompson.
That was Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy you just heard there. We'll hear more from him in just a moment on the announcement he made last week that will drastically reduce eligibility for non-domiciled CDLs. But first, Scott Thompson, it is wonderful to have you back from Joplin, Missouri.
Here I am. Yes, great 3 days there at the Guilty by Association Truck Show in Joplin, Missouri. I know I checked in on Friday, I guess, right after I got there.
Mm-hmm.
You've been before.
Yeah.
It's a great time.
Such a fun show.
This was a really great 3 days, great weather throughout. The vibes, as they so often are there, great as well. I will have a full recap later in the week on all that went on from some of the people behind I think it was 700 trucks that were there, give or take a few. Obviously, the convoy was a big deal and more. So we're going to get into all that later in the week here in terms of, everything I saw there and everything that people were talking about. But we should get some of that business out of the way. And you talked about it there just a moment ago, Ashley, with Secretary Duffy announcing that non-domiciled CDL action. FMCSA Senior Policy Advisor Michael Hampton actually held a Q&A alongside OOIDA President Todd Spencer at GBATS on Friday, right after that announcement from Secretary Duffy. So with that in mind, the non-domiciled CDL issue was fresh on everybody's mind there that was participating. The move, no surprise here, I don't think, largely celebrated by those in attendance at that Friday event at GBATS. Had a lot of questions, a lot of talk about what the move was and the problems that they're seeing out there. We should probably, though, before we get into all of this, provide some details maybe for some of those who may have missed it. Again, that big announcement on Friday.
Yes. So Secretary Duffy made an announcement about 2 immediate actions USDOT is taking after he detailed the results from an audit that was done of non-domiciled CDLs in the U.S.
That is why today I'm announcing 2 immediate major actions. Number 1, we're issuing an emergency rule that fundamentally overhauls who is eligible for a non-domiciled CDL. These tighter federal standards, they're going to keep Americans and families safe on our roadways. Now, this is not a proposal. This is a final rule, and it is effective immediately. Non-citizens will not be eligible for a CDL unless they meet a much stricter set of rules. Second, all states must immediately pause the issuance of non-domiciled CDLs until they can comply with our new rules. My message, it's very simple. Get into compliance now, or we'll pull funding and we'll force you into compliance.
So that was, again, Secretary Duffy, Transportation Secretary, talking about non-domiciled CDLs. If any of that sounds familiar, that's because this is pretty much what OOIDA had asked the Department of Transportation to do back in August, following that deadly crash in Florida that got all the headlines shortly afterward. The association has said, let's hit pause on issuing non-domiciled CDLs until the audit that they launched back in June could be completed, and we can all kind of get a full picture of what the situation is out there. And what we heard from Secretary Duffy on Friday was that what they found so far essentially is enough to warrant some action there.
Yeah. During the announcement, Secretary Duffy said nowhere in the country have they found a more egregious licensing situation than in the state of California. He said during the audit of non-domiciled CDLs, over 25% were issued illegally. He then gave a few examples.
This is driver PND from Brazil. So California gave him a CDL with endorsements to drive a passenger bus and a school bus that was valid for months after his legal presence in the U.S. had expired. They put an authorized driver in a position to transport our kids on a school bus well beyond their date of work authorization. If California doesn't comply, we're going to withhold federal highway funds. It's going to start at $160 million in the first year. We're going to double that in year two.
Duffy added that non-domiciled CDLs were issued improperly in Colorado, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, Texas, and Washington. He warned these states that enforcement actions against them are forthcoming.
Yeah, it really is remarkable how quickly this has all kind of taken place. Again, June is when this sort of really started to kind of enter the conversation, I think, at least the Department of Transportation looking at the issue. And here we are 3 months later, and we're seeing a lot of action here. So again, just to summarize, a lot of information coming in. But essentially what we're looking at here is the pool of people eligible for non-domiciled CDLs is going to be much, much smaller. People who are not citizens of the USA will not be eligible unless they pass a series of stricter requirements, which include an employment-based visa and a federal immigration status check. States are going to be held to a higher standard in all of this as well, as we heard the Secretary say there, including California and those 5 other states that the Secretary really appears to have in his sights right now based on what he says he has seen. We'll wait to see what else may be coming here because it does appear that there can be more that can be done. So we'll see what that looks like. But again, in short, this puts some strict limits on non-domiciled CDLs, which were initially, we should remember this, meant to make life a little easier for U.S. citizens, U.S. truck drivers who live in one state, easier for them to get a CDL while they were living temporarily in another, meaning they didn't have to return to their home state to complete the testing and licensing process. What that did, as we have seen here, was essentially open the door for all sorts of abuses and loopholes, which we're seeing addressed right now. So stay tuned on all of that.
Yeah, and right after the break, we're going to get OOIDA's Director of Government Affairs, Collin Long, on the line. He'll break down this whole announcement. We've got lots of questions for him just to understand what this announcement was and what it could mean for the future. And then after that, I will sit down with Buck Black. He is a therapist. I'll talk to him about Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, what it means, what signs and symptoms you should be aware of, and then, of course, any places to find help and when those times should come that you should reach out. Stay tuned for that.
And we're back continuing this discussion about non-domiciled CDLs and the restrictions added last week by the Department of Transportation. And as promised, we have OOIDA Director of Government Affairs, Collin Long, on the line to talk about it. Collin, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of just what we learned last week and what's going to happen moving forward here, your initial reaction to Friday's announcement?
It was great news. It was welcome news. It was news we've been hoping to hear. I think it actually came a little bit earlier than we anticipated. I mean, if you remember, DOT started to audit states on the issuance of non-domiciled CDLs back in June. So it's a pretty quick turnaround to then have action come out in late September. I think we were all kind of anticipating this process to run a little longer, but the end result is pretty much exactly what we were hoping for. So Friday's news was very much welcomed by OOIDA and applauded.
And back in August, OOIDA had asked the DOT to suspend states' authority to issue non-domiciled CDLs until at least a review was complete. How does this action on Friday line up with what OOIDA had been asking for?
Pretty closely. I mean, they don't eliminate non-domiciled CDLs entirely, which, frankly, I don't find that surprising. Some folks might be disappointed that the program hasn't officially been killed, but you don't have to take those steps to necessarily prevent non-domiciled CDLs from being issued. And I think what DOT did by putting so many restrictions in place have basically created a disincentive for a lot of states to continue issuing non-domiciled CDLs. And I mean, time will ultimately tell. I think there are states who have been very active in issuing these who may want to continue, but I think by and large, DOT has twisted enough screws to make sure that these programs, I think, ultimately will evaporate. So the announcement was great. The suspension call we made in August wasn't necessarily heated, but I think it's because DOT knew they were just going to crack down on the issuance of non-domiciles at the end of September. So I think everyone is pleased.
Is there anything else you would have liked to have seen come with this announcement?
No, I mean, I think they did a good job of frankly depoliticizing the issue. I mean, I think California is getting their getting their hands slapped quite a bit on this because they issue non-doms in what is clearly, according to the Trump administration, an illegal way. But there were other states that got called out too, and I think that was appropriate because too many folks have been viewing this issue as blue states are the violators and red states are perfectly fine. And we at OOIDA have been saying, the data doesn't show that. And I think as DOT starts to take a closer look, we'll start to realize that this issue is a problem in states across the country, no matter what their political perspective is. And I think pointing out that Texas is an offender, that South Dakota is an offender, and that blue states like Pennsylvania and Colorado are, I think really helps reinforce the fact that this was a national problem and something that had to be addressed on a national scope by USDOT. So good job for them to single out California, but also put some others on notice, because I think it will have a very strong effect on reducing the issuance of non-domiciles in basically every state across the country, which is a great goal.
I'm going to follow up to Ashley's question there because now stretch out, Collin. I may ask you to pat yourself on the back here, but we saw those 9 initiatives earlier in the summer, and so many of them ticked all the boxes of things that OOIDA had been advocating for. Last month in August, OOIDA brought up this issue and essentially asked the Department of Transportation to take action on non-domiciled CDLs, and they did. About a month and a half later, or whatever the timeline was there. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit, and again, I don't know if you or the association is going to want to take full credit for something like this, but I think it is worth pointing out that the association is pointing to a number of things that this administration then apparently is paying attention to and taking action on. That has to be, a bit of a feather in the association's cap as you look at all these issues out there that are affecting people.
Absolutely. And, we go further back than August. I mean, we were talking about non-domiciled CDLs and the problem with the prevalence of their issuance back in the early months of this year when our Vice President, Louis Pugh, was testifying in the House and the Senate. If you go back and take a look at his testimony, we talk about this program and we question the need for it in the first place. I think that was really the root of USDOT saying, we do need to get to the bottom of this. And thankfully, I think their audit has resulted in some consistency between what OOIDA said was happening within the states and what they discovered truly is happening within the states. And, we've always said this is a safety issue. Safety is the core problem here. I mean, the folks who are getting these non-domiciled CDLs aren't being held to the same standards as domestic-based drivers. That's a real problem, and I think it's one that led our argument and that really opened the door for USDOT to come in and say, we agree this is a major safety issue and we have to address it to improve conditions on our highways. So we are very pleased that they have followed through and basically dried up this program, we think, because it's going to benefit safety. And I think a lot of folks don't appreciate that fact. I think that has gotten lost in the shuffle quite a bit. But USDOT has been very clear that they view it as a safety issue, and that is consistent with what OOIDA has been saying since the early months of this year when we first started testifying about this problem, and then continued by having conversations with FMCSA, sending these letters, sending letters to the states. I think it's important to remember that OOIDA sent out 50 letters to governors saying, until USDOT finishes this audit and comes up with some solutions, you should suspend your programs. And a month later, DOT came out and did that. So the timing was pretty good. I mean, we always joke that things don't move quickly in government. This is an example of how the department was able to address a serious safety issue in a very timely manner. So bravo.
Now, of course, this past year, we've heard of, several accidents that have made headlines, and that's obviously brought this issue to the forefront. But I'm curious, when did this issue start setting off alarm bells for you?
Our members started raising red flags initially. And that's how we generate a lot of our policy objectives here in Washington, D.C., is we hear from our members, from the experts on the road, about safety concerns they were encountering and they were witnessing. And I think a lot of it was drawn back to the question of how are the folks who are committing a lot of these safety problems on the roads, how are they getting their licenses, and what's going on with that? And, we approached it in a couple ways. I think, one, we saw that this non-domiciled issue was a problem. Two, we saw that English proficiency or the lack of English proficiency was a problem. And three, we saw that training standards are too low. The minimum is too low. And, we've had a breakthrough on ELP. We now have a breakthrough on non-dom, and we hope to continue working with this administration and more specifically Capitol Hill to have a breakthrough to improve training. That's what our next steps will be. I mean, we'll see how this non-dom issue plays out, and we're continuing to see how ELP plays out. But I think pivoting to training now and making sure that no matter who is receiving a CDL, they are ready to operate that vehicle safely will be our next big objective. And I think we have a USDOT who's very agreeable on that. So we continue to move forward, but we aren't going to not take credit for the non-dom issue because, like I said, I mean, we've been talking about it early this year. Our members have been talking about it long before that. So it's really an example of grassroots advocacy where it really started at the driver level, worked its way up, and now we have the federal department responsible for highway safety taking pretty significant steps to remedy a problem that our members had identified several months ago. So bravo to our members, and bravo to the team at OOIDA for continuing to push for this and continuing to advocate at USDOT for safety improvements. I think that was critical, and to have our members' experience at the forefront really convinced a lot of folks at DOT that this was a safe move for them to make, and no pun intended, but taking folks off the road who went through dubious licensing processes throughout the states, I think it is a noble endeavor, and certainly it will have a safety value.
It always strikes me how so many of the issues that we talk about so regularly are tied together. And with this one, and you mentioned it there briefly, and I think if we could explore it a little bit, but
Sure.
when we're talking about non-domiciled CDLs, and we're talking about safety, and we're talking about putting seemingly unsafe people out on roadways, and not really having a system in place to put checks on that, this really does, and this is something that came up during GBATS a number of times during the Q&A session with FMCSA, talking about driver training, and you mentioned it there, and I think that if we are going to kind of push this issue toward a place, it would seem like driver training, because a lot of the things we're talking about here could be kind of sifted out during the driver training process if we were to have a better system in place. And that is something that I know you and your colleagues there in Washington, D.C. are talking about all the time, right? Driver training, and how do we get that system up and running in a better way?
Yeah, and there's a number of ways to do it. I think English language proficiency, ensuring that is happening on the training level. So folks don't even receive a license if they haven't proven their proficiency in English is a good start. We talk about 30 hours behind the wheel as a bare minimum for entry-level driver training requirements. We're pushing for that here in Washington quite strongly in the development of the next highway bill. And we've worked with folks to make sure that training schools who have bad records, I mean, we can follow the trail of safety problems back to training schools now because of the LDT. And it's time to start, I don't want to say come down hard on those training schools, but if they're demonstrating a deficiency in their training, then steps need to be taken to improve matters. And I think all of this is kind of coming together from different angles, but we see it much more holistically at OOIDA as making sure that the folks who are getting CDLs and are operating heavy vehicles are properly trained and vetted to be doing so. And I think when you look at all these pieces, they put together a puzzle that strengthens safety because it puts a lot more onus on making sure that CDLs are being issued in a safe, responsible, and transparent manner.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking about that at GBATS, Rodney Maureen, OOIDA board member, was one of the people in that Q&A with FMCSA's Michael Hampton. And he just raised the question, and he was pretty just straightforward about it, is why do we even have non-domiciled CDLs anymore, which was basically his question, given, what we know about the loopholes and all the other problems that are out there.
Sure.
His message was essentially don't fix it, eliminate it. Easier said than done, I'm sure. But is that something that you see as maybe being, kind of a final chapter in this, or is this always going to be an element that we just have to make sure we're doing everything right with?
I mean, I think the steps USDOT have taken will, in essence, end the program. But let's keep in mind, I mean, another administration can come in 3 years and several years later and undo what the Trump administration has done. So there's certainly a legislative play at hand, or there's still a legislative play, I should say, to make a lot of this permanent. But, we're really pleased that in the foreseeable future, I think states have less interest in issuing non-domiciled CDLs to anyone. And I think Rodney is right. There's clear safety concerns, but I think we often overlook the fact that a lot of these policies were built on this myth of a driver shortage. There's people out there saying, we need more drivers, we need more drivers. Unfortunately, that opens the door for folks to be issuing non-domiciled CDLs because they've convinced folks that there's just this major appetite for drivers, this need for drivers. And we say this all along, like if you believe in the driver shortage myth, it leads to bad policies. It leads to unsafe policies. And I think this is a really good example of it. And I hope it gets people to refocus on the fact that there is no driver shortage. I mean, supplies will continue to move, freight will continue to move across the country if non-domiciled CDLs go up in smoke. And there won't be any disruptions in the freight market because, frankly, there's too much in the freight market right now. I mean, there's too much inventory in the freight market. I'm not hitting home run describing this.
Overcapacity.
I should have Todd Spencer's talking points, but there are certainly too many motor carriers for the amount of freight that's going on right now. So taking folks off the road, it might sound kind of heavy-handed, but you can't forget that there's a safety component. At the same time, there's no driver shortage, so we don't necessarily need to be issuing non-domiciled CDLs to folks who haven't gone through the same vetting and the same standards as domestic drivers. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. When I listened to the announcement, and I don't know if you listened to the whole thing, but at the end when he did take questions, some of the reporters there, I mean, you can almost tell the headline that they were writing because they did ask, well, what about the driver shortage? Is this going to affect the supply chain? Did you hear those questions? And I'm curious your
I could
thoughts
hear
on
his
that.
eyes. I could hear Colin's eyes rolling in the back of his head. So yes, he probably
They rolled out of the room.
roll out
Actually.
of the room. Yeah.
It's something we face all the time. I mean, the folks on the other side of the driver shortage argument have done a really good job convincing people that this thing is real, despite the fact that there's federal research telling folks it's not real. The supplies in the grocery store shelves have been pretty well supplied. Your deliveries are reaching their destination on time. Like the indicators of a driver shortage just aren't there, but there's still a lot of folks, and especially in trucking media, who believe it and who continue this narrative. And I think USDOT, what they put out, I think, gives us a lot of ammunition to go back and reiterate the fact that there is no driver shortage. Because if there was true concern that eliminating the issuance of non-domiciled CDLs would have an effect on our supply chain, I don't think we'd see this Department of Transportation do it. So I think they're pretty confident in the fact that the shortage is indeed a myth, and they can take steps like this to improve safety without jeopardizing the efficiency of the supply chain, which we completely agree with.
To your point earlier, we're not used to seeing government work, I think, this fast, and we've seen them work pretty fast in recent months on a number of issues here. This being one of them. The Secretary made it crystal clear on Friday that this is a final rule, that this is actually happening. It's an interim final rule at this point, but it has been published in the Federal Register. Comments are being accepted through the end of November, I believe. I imagine they're going to get a lot of comments on this issue, and I know the association, OOIDA, will be one of those comments that are provided there. Your advice to people listening to this, again, this is a hot-button issue. It was the number one issue that I was hearing about at GBADS. But for those who want to weigh in, what's your advice to them?
I just want to reinforce the fact that USDOT, in issuing this, believes they are putting restrictions in place that will effectively kill the issuance of non-domiciled CDLs. I think people need to keep that in mind. It's not, if you read through the rule, it's not a clear killer of the program. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, states are going to be much more reluctant to issue non-domiciled CDLs, and the restrictions in place will prevent them from doing so. And I think folks need to keep that in mind and be supportive of a DOT that is with you on this issue and believes this is, yes, a serious safety concern. And no, it won't contribute to problems within the supply chain. So just remember that they are supportive of truckers on this issue, and they are working to achieve the same goals that we want to see, and show them your support. I think it's important that when they address the concerns of truckers that have been building over the course of the last several months, if not a year, we need to acknowledge that, and we need to be supportive of their efforts to address those. And it may not be, like I said, the end of the program in its entirety, but by and large, I think non-domiciled CDL issuances are kind of going to go up in smoke. But we'll see.
We will see. And we'll see, it seems, pretty quickly here.
Yeah.
I mean, again, considering the slow movement of government typically, this is all moving very fast. And Collin, we appreciate you coming on and talking about this issue. It won't be the last we talk about it, I'm sure, but we'll talk about it again soon. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That
was Collin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. We'll take a very quick break here, but when we come back, Buck Black talking mental health.
Welcome back to Trucking with OOIDA. September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, a time to raise awareness. And to help us do that, we have therapist Buck Black on the line. Buck, I'm curious, what does this month mean to you?
Well, I think that's a good question. When I think of any month that brings attention to an important topic, I think, well, it should be 12 months out of the year. That's the first place that my mind goes. But it is fantastic that we do have a month dedicated to suicide awareness. And it is such a stigmatized topic that just it isn't talked about enough, and there's all the shame and so on. So it's great that there's a light that's brought to it. And in the end, I think it really helps people a lot.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed online, people talking more about it because it's, the prevention month. Do you think it kind of gives people a reason to bring it up? Like you said, it's not a comfortable topic.
Yeah. So as far as if we have permission to talk about difficult topics, then we're much more likely to talk about it. And if there isn't anything brought up about suicide, then that's generally something that you don't talk about, at dinner time or really any other time for that matter.
Yeah. Do you think society has done? Are we doing a better job as far as breaking down the stigma, or do you still think there is a long way to go?
Well, there's still a ways to go. But I think that every time someone asks me about stigma, definitely with any type of mental health, every day it gets better. So every time I'm asked that question, it's like, well, I really think it's better than what it has been. And the pandemic helped to bring mental health to, just more into the spotlight. Mm-hmm. And things have been getting better since the pandemic. So you can look at that as somewhat of a turning point there.
I'm curious, what is the difference? There's being, suicidal and then having suicide ideation. Is that the right way to say that?
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference
Right.
between that?
Well, ideation just means that you're thinking of it. And so suicidal ideation would be more of, I have thoughts of suicide. I haven't acted on it. I haven't tried it, but I'm just thinking, what if? Or maybe even getting to the point of having a plan, and then of course you've got people that have fallen into the situation where they have attempted suicide, or that they've made very strong plans and gathering, maybe material items to do so. So, that's taking action that's beyond ideation. Does that explain it very well?
Yes. Yeah, I think it does. At what point do you feel like if someone is, experiencing any of that, do you feel like they should reach out for help?
Well, I think that if anyone's having thoughts of suicide to any degree, they need to reach out for help. So basically, there's different levels of help, and I'll go ahead and describe that. So the first would be, you're just kind of thinking about it. You just have the thought and it passes. That's often called fleeting thoughts of suicide. So if you just have a thought and it just goes away, I don't know. It's good to talk to someone that you trust and just tell them, hey, this is where my mind's going, and I don't know what that's about. And if it becomes more of a persistent thought, then that's when reaching out for help, like calling 988, the suicide prevention hotline, that would be appropriate. And also, if you just keep having those thoughts of suicide, reaching out to a therapist, reaching out to a doctor. And then the even more urgent piece is, if you have these solid plans and you feel that you're going to act on it, then yes, 988 is an option, or going to the nearest emergency department and getting help right away, making sure that you're safe, making sure that you get help. So there's a few different levels there.
Obviously, scary for anyone who has these thoughts and feelings. What obstacles do you see for truck drivers if they're experiencing any of this?
Well, so it's the classic difficulty with being a truck driver, just as far as the job is isolating. There's a lot of loneliness. It's not easy to call for help. You're not sure what to do. All of those isolating situations. So the good news is, if you really are having trouble, then you can call 988 instantly, and you can get help with that. That's the good news. The more difficult is ongoing. That if you need support on a very regular basis, then that's where teletherapy is helpful. That's where reaching out to friends and family over the phone is helpful. But again, if everything's on the phone and you're stuck on the road, that's a challenge, and that's not the same as being in person. So I would definitely say that would be the biggest concern for drivers, as well as just plenty of times kind of the macho attitude of, well, I don't need any help, I'm 100% reliant, and that kind of thing. So there is a bit of a cultural concern too.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what would you say to a truck driver who may be feeling suicidal, but, the reality of life is still there, and they've, got their schedule is packed. They don't feel like they have the time to reach out. How important is it for them to stop and prioritize, themselves?
Well, it's extremely important for a driver to take care of themselves. So if they're having these suicidal thoughts and they say, well, I don't have time to deal with this. Well, if it turns into a situation where the driver acts on these suicidal thoughts, then that's something that it either can't be fixed if they're successful, or if the attempt fails, well, there's often a lot of damage that occurs. So it doesn't matter what happens there. The driver cannot afford to ignore that. So, you could look at it as having not taking care of your truck and saying, well, I've got too much work to do. I'm not going to take care of my truck. And we all know that the truck will eventually let you down. So you don't want to let yourself down due to lack of maintenance. And again, we know that maintenance is a key part of the job. And we always think about maintenance for the truck. We don't think about maintenance for ourselves. And that is just so very important. And not to mention 80,000 pounds driving down the road, you are putting other people in a lot of danger if you're having difficulty with your own mental health at that point.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you see this a lot as far as people who do feel this way, who feel like, you feel very isolated, you feel very alone, and that, no one could understand, what the feeling is. But I mean, a lot of people struggle with mental health. We've seen statistics. How hard is it, I guess, to get that message across to someone, but also how beneficial is it for someone who is feeling this way to maybe hear someone else's story that, they've been where they are, but yet they've come out of it?
Well, some people are really in tune with mental health and just simply knowing that everybody has a hard time at some point in their life. And then there's other people who think it's just simply them and no one else can relate. So it's hugely beneficial if we talk about suicide, if we talk about mental health, if we talk about just any kind of emotional problems. And the more that people can hear stories and realize that they're not alone, they'll be able to get help and life will be a whole lot better. And if you think about it, I'm just one therapist out of thousands, and it is my full-time job. I have more clients than I can handle. And the situation is everybody has similar types of problems and they need help. And, I have to refer potential clients on to other therapists with openings on a very regular basis. So just think about that. The demand is so high out there. So if a person is feeling alone, no, there's thousands and thousands of people in a very similar situation.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I know I've mentioned to you before that I find interesting is just, I think one of the hardest things is the struggle as far as explaining it. I think when we go to the doctor for anything physical, we know what to expect as far as saying, what it feels like or how it's bothering us. I think when it comes to mental health, do you find it sometimes harder for people to explain how they're feeling?
I think plenty of times. And I just encourage people just to use plain English to talk about what's going on. And plenty of times you can talk about what your emotional feelings are, if it's mad, glad, sad, scared, or something else. But I mean, those are the main root emotions. And then another thing is that if people talk about how they're feeling things in their body, so if you have like a stomach ache that doesn't go away, or you feel it in your chest, like an emptiness, or the classic lump in your throat, or tight shoulders all the time, or something like that. So if you can't find the words to talk about the emotional feelings, talk about the physical stuff going on with your body. And once you get the conversation started with someone, especially if they're a trained someone, and then you're usually able to get places.
Mm-hmm. Now, we unfortunately hear stories of people who have used semi-trucks, tractor trailers to end their lives. What advice do you have for drivers who've unfortunately been in a situation like that?
Yeah, and the term is suicide by truck, and that is a very unfortunate situation that you have people that usually are not in the trucking industry and they're suicidal, and their plan to kill themselves is to be ran over by a semi. And that is so sad, so unfortunate. And I've talked with a lot of truck drivers that are traumatized because that has happened. And then I've talked with families of the person who did kill themselves that way. And everybody is so incredibly devastated. So I think that being a truck driver, it's hard in many different ways, no doubt about it. But with suicide, there's definitely two sides there of the truck driver potentially being suicidal, and then if someone commits suicide by truck, then the truck driver's on the other side of that. And if that happens, sometimes the truck driver has post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as a result.
Mm-hmm.
So again, very unfortunate situation. And if any trucker or their families have been involved in suicide by truck, again, reach out, get help, get support, talk about it, deal with it. That's the best thing you can do in those situations.
I'm wondering too, families, who have someone who may be suicidal or, have done that. What advice do you have for them, in reaching out and getting help for themselves to then help their loved one or family member?
Well, I think for the families, it's just really important to reach out and get help. Don't keep it a secret. Whether it is that the family has someone that is suicidal and they haven't acted on it, that they need to reach out and get help. And if it is the family that their loved one has killed themselves, then again, it's important to reach out and get help. So many times, family members, they just don't talk about it. They just try to press the emotions down and deal with it. But stuffing emotions is not a good way. It's not a good long-term way to cope.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of families out there that have been through this kind of thing, and there's support groups for survivors of suicide. And you just have to Google that, and you'll find support groups out there, as well as typical counseling. So there is hope, no matter what side of the fence you're on here.
You mentioned, stuffing things down and ignoring them. I think I'm confident in saying that it will eventually come up, right? Like if you don't deal with something now, down the road, it's going to be there and get worse, maybe.
Right, most definitely. I think of stuffing a bucket, full of marbles, and you can stick them in there, and then once it's full, it starts overflowing, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about it. So you just have to make sure that you deal with that stuff. And it's tempting to try to make it go away, or try to drink it away, or use any other kind of illegal drugs or something, and that is not the fix.
Mm-hmm.
Addressing it is the fix. Again, with plenty of friends and family, addressing it with them, and then if it's still persisting, then talk with a professional about it.
What would you say to somebody who's thinking, they're having these thoughts and feelings, but they're thinking, what's the point of talking to somebody? Like, what's that going to do? What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, you're not alone, and this is happening all the time to lots and lots of people. And as I discussed, there are all kinds of therapists out there that is their main job is to help people in those situations. And believe it or not, if you talk about what's going on, it makes it so much better. And if you don't believe me, try talking with someone that is understanding and caring, and you'll quickly realize that it helps. And if you can't talk with someone, write about it. As far as journaling, And don't worry about the grammar or the spelling or anything like that. Just start writing about it. And if you write about it with using pen and paper, that helps the person to deal with those feelings better than typing. But the idea is getting it out there one way or the other and give it a try. And I'm quite certain that you will feel that it's quite helpful.
Nice. That's good advice. I guess in my last question, I'm just curious, any final words, any advice that you have for any of our listeners?
Well, suicide is preventable, and there is help out there. And people often feel like no one can help them. And talking with someone that is trained is the way to go when things get really tough. And remember, you can call 988. That is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And just simply making sure that you just don't keep everything to yourself. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's a one-time thing that you just need to talk to someone that's caring. Maybe you need to talk to someone on a regular basis. Maybe you need to talk with a therapist. Maybe the person needs some medication, like an antidepressant, to help them with depression or anxiety or some kind of underlying things, and talk with your primary care doctor. The main thing is don't keep it to yourself and get out there and get some kind of help for it. And if the first time around isn't enough, then you keep talking to professionals to find the right type of help that you personally need.
All right. Good advice. Buck, thank you so much.
Oh, I certainly appreciate it.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
At Truck Stop, we've built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget misaccuracy when you're truck on a CAT scale.
House products provide your diesel with total performance and protection. Use Diesel Defender for a full system cleaning. Start treatment early with Diesel Treat to prevent gelling all season, and protect yourself from winter emergencies with Diesel Lifeline. Stay moving with House.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Good advice there from Buck Black. The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, again, which he mentioned, was 988, which you can call, text, or chat online. Main message, of course, is that you are not alone. Help is available, so please take that step.
Absolutely.
And of course, Scott, it's not just September that we want to bring attention to this matter. It's important to focus on mental health year-round, and like Buck said, it's nice to have these months, though, to really focus on that. And so we appreciate him taking the time to talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's an important message. And quite frankly, it's one and a conversation that can be very difficult to have, especially if you're having feelings,
for sure.
That may not be necessarily the brightest of feelings.
Yeah.
It can be very hard out there for anybody. But yeah, if you've found yourself feeling a certain way, please do reach out to somebody for sure. Which kind of, honestly, in a weird kind of way, brings me back to GBATS, the Guilty by Association Truck Show, which took place this past weekend in Joplin, Missouri, because it really is truly about community, right? And coming together and talking about, all the problems you're seeing out there and realizing you're not alone. So the two things, I suppose, are somewhat linked in that way. But like we were saying earlier, great weather there in Joplin. somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 700 trucks registered for the show,
Nice.
somewhere around 230 trucks entering into the convoy, which benefits Special Olympics Missouri. Talked to a couple people about that as well. Great time walking around, checking out the trucks, obviously, which I think is probably the main attraction there. Talking with people who are responsible for creating them. Always great to talk to those people because those, as you have found, it's like their baby.
Oh, gosh, they're so proud.
So proud. There's one gentleman I talked to, and I'll have much more on this later in the week, but had just finished his truck.
Nice.
It was like a multi-year planning and getting the money together, scrapping it all together. And this was like his first time showing off the truck, and could not be happier. So it's great talking to people like that. Much more conversations like that one that we can share with you a little bit later in the week here. And we've talked about this too. The one thing that separates GBATS, I think, from all the other truck shows out there, to a person, I asked each of them, what's different about this one? They all said they appreciated the laid back nature of the show. No pressure. There's a lot of shows out there that are all about the competition, about who's got the better, newer, sleeker truck out there. There's definitely a place for that type of show, I think.
For sure.
That goes without saying. We love those too, obviously. But yeah, again, someone once described GBATS as being like a neighborhood block party, and that is totally the feeling. That's exactly what it feels like. Everybody in a good mood. All the walking around, checking out trucks, talking to folks. Really a good time there. Lots of events to talk about as well. So we will do that. And then again, the FMCSA Q&A session with Michael Hampton. Todd Spencer was there alongside him. They talked about non-domiciled CDLs, obviously, with that being the topic of the day, but broker transparency, driver training, a host of other issues. So stay tuned for coverage of that later on in the week. Got a lot of sound I need to go through to find out how we'll kind of package it. But really a good time there. And then back here, you were staying busy too in Grain Valley.
I was hoping for like a nice, peaceful couple of days
without me,
without you around.
Yeah.
No. But no, definitely busy. We, of course, had the news on the non-domiciled CDLs that we heard about earlier in the show. But also President Trump announced that starting on October 1st, he will be imposing a 25% tariff on all heavy trucks made in other parts of the world. He had posted that with this new tariff, the large truck company manufacturers such as Peterbilt, Kenworth, Mack, and others will be protected from onslaught of outside interruptions. He said that we need our truckers to be financially healthy and strong for many reasons, but above all for national security purposes. We're, of course, we're going to be getting somebody on the show to break all this down and explain what it could mean, what the impact could be. But from what we've heard so far, especially from the OOIDA Foundation, this isn't good. It's not a good announcement.
Well, and I suppose it's how you look at it. It's all about perspective.
That's true.
I think the concerns obviously are the effect this is going to have.
Trickle-down effect, yeah.
Exactly. On down the market, the supply chain, the used truck sales market will be affected by this if it does, in fact, go into effect. That's the other question, too. We've seen the president make tariff announcements and set a date and then have that date pushed
changed.
back.
Yeah.
So we will see how that all pans out. But that's something we're definitely keeping an eye on. We'll talk more about that later in the week. We've also got Louis Pugh coming in to talk about his attendance at CVSA's annual conference, which happened last week in Denver. Louis was also at GBATS. We'll talk to him about that as well. And it's the 50th anniversary issue of Landline Magazine.
Very exciting.
So we'll get the inside scoop on that as well. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next time right here on Trucking with OOIDA.
Today's episode of Trucking with OOIDA was brought to you by a dedicated team of people that includes Jim Fetzer, Tennille Flick, and Kim Boren.
You got thoughts? We'd love to hear them. You can call us at 1-800-324-6856 and leave us a message, or send us an email at podcast@ooida.com, and we might just include it on the show.